Good morning, Rohan.
Good morning, Olysha. How are you this morning?
I'm great, thanks.
I'm happy that we're here because today we want to look at fostering inclusion in the online learning environment. I'm Rohan Jowallah from the University of Central Florida, and I've been working at UCF for the past 7 years. I've also worked in three different countries: Jamaica, Trinidad, and of course, maybe another one, UK. Over to you, Olysha, at this point.
I'm Olysha Magruder. I'm with Johns Hopkins University Whiting School of Engineering. I've been with the Whiting School for about 5+ years, and I am the assistant director of the Center for Learning Design, where I manage our instructional design team and our faculty development efforts. I have not lived officially in other countries, though I have explored a lot, and I was an exchange student when I was younger. But I have traveled quite a bit. So today's session is going to focus on a few main things. The first thing we want to do is establish some definitions in terms of inclusive pedagogy as it relates to online learning. And we also want to talk about some key distinctions between accessibility and inclusion. We're going to look at that a little bit more deeply. We'd like to talk about the benefits and challenges of this concept, especially as it relates to instructional design processes. And then we're going to also talk about practices and frameworks about inclusion and course design processes.
Thanks for that overview, Alicia. I want us to look at what is inclusive education. I have done some studies in inclusive education. As a matter of fact, I did my master's in that area. And what I realized that inclusive education considers the participation of everyone in the curriculum, also gives consideration to the diversity of the learner, and of course takes in consideration the religious background, social background, and also the cultural background, because these issues can create barriers within the curriculum for access. To be inclusive, you have to be proactive. You have to identify barriers and remove potential barriers. We have to also consider in the concept of inclusive education, the relevant policies that have been used over a period of time to marginalize individuals and not allow them to reach their full potential. We have to also look at inclusive education within the construct of inclusive pedagogy. Inclusive pedagogy considers an ideological shift from approaches that just seek to support individuals who have difficulties in learning, or, for example, experience physical or limitations as it relates to access. Within the inclusive pedagogy approach, there's equal opportunities for all students in the learning environment. And as I use the concept of all students, we have to be mindful of the term equity, because at some point we have to give students additional support other than the normal framework to allow them to achieve. So you have to consider the issue of equity as you move forward. As we move on, I want us to think about the reality. Many individuals will say that we have total inclusion in the curriculum, and I've seen that concept being floated across the United States. However, I want to say that where I stand, and Olivia and I will discuss this, no country has yet to construct a school system that lives up to the ideal intention of inclusion. I want us to look at a pathway for inclusive pedagogy. And as I stated before, inclusive pedagogy is an ideological shift from the traditional approach that seeks to support only those who experience difficulties. And I want us to consider the concept of creating equal opportunity within any possible framework that we're going to be looking at. So I'm just refocusing on those points that I mentioned earlier. Without having to go through the point of critical reflection, I think you will never move towards having an inclusive curriculum. Why do I say this? I consider a few years ago, to be exact, when I looked at the need for critical reflection as it relates to my own practice. Critical reflection is really reflecting on something. But if you're truly to go through the process of making change, as Sean has indicated, you have to modify behavior. So therefore, you have to have purposeful change. And I'm going to show a framework that I'm considering and I've considered over a period of time. I want us to also look at reflexive, inclusive pedagogy. And I think we have to focus on this. We have to go through the process of making change. We have to look at our privileges. We have to be culturally sensitive. We have to align our teaching theory with critical theory. And why do I say this? Because critical theory looks at the issue of injustice within our society and addresses our injustices in the society. Therefore, we will have another point where Alicia will discuss another aspect that we can bring critical theory in. I want also to mention that we have to go beyond policies to ensure greater inclusivity. If we look at our current policies as it relates to inclusion, these policies are geared at mainly things that are physical, but not issues connected to cultural, religious, and so forth. So we have to make purposeful efforts to go beyond that. We have to also use students' feedback to improve our course design because that's going to be important. If students are not having a sense of belonging in that course or in that institution, then they will not have a sense of being included. Another point that we sometimes not go down the road of doing is mentioning and celebrating student success. We must also be proactive, and that will require reflection and change in our habit to respond to students' learning needs. And also, the fundamental part is we have to be aware of power within our communication practices. Too often, we'll see students think that professors and instructors are not addressing their needs and they see a power imbalance. So we have to ensure that as we plan and support individuals in development of their courses, that we make sure these balance dynamics are addressed over a period of time. So here's my framework. Conceptualizing critical, reflective, reflexive, inclusive pedagogy brings together the notion of inclusion, inclusive pedagogy, and the need for reflection. So here's where you start. You start to engage in critical reflection. You move towards critical reflexive practice where you're changing your behavior. You then become committed to inclusive pedagogy and your behavior is transformed. So now you are in the mode of understanding what is required for inclusive curriculum design or course development. And then you move towards consistently developing that critical, reflexive, inclusive pedagogy over a period of time. However, you have to be mindful that this is going to be a working practice and you have to consistently engage to ensure that you are reflecting on what you're doing and in the process you're making the required change to ensure that your teaching and learning population as well as for those courses that you're helping design are reflective of sound inclusive items or I would say tenants.